and we welcome you.
I'm Rosa.
And I'm Devin. Today we are reading from two of the hottest writers that are up and coming, really the best. And by that I mean that I forgot to ask for submissions on time, so I'll be reading some of Rosa's work and she'll be reading some of mine. This piece is entitled Wildflowers. Martha ran the flat side of the shovel back and forth over the patch of damp earth. Martha ran the flat side of the shovel back and forth over the patch of damp dirt. Bending down, she picked up a small stone and shoved it into her front pocket. She stood and rolled her shoulders before crossing herself and bowing her head. A slight breeze blew several strands of hair into her face. Tucking the strands behind her ear, she looked out over it. The sun was fading over the horizon, streaking red and orange across the sky. She sighed, lightly gripping the wooden handle of the shovel in her gloved hand, then tossed it into the bed of the ATV buggy. She reached into the small brown sack on the passenger seat and grabbed a handful of seeds. Turning, she cast them about the freshly turned dirt. Jumping into the buggy, she turned it on and headed across the back few acres of her property towards home. As she neared the two-story ranch house, she smiled. Susie was playing in the grass with their chocolate Labrador, Root Beer. Waved her arm back and forth at Martha. Martha waved back, gliding the buggy to the large barn across the yard from the house and parking beside the fenced green tractor. She stepped out, kicking one foot then the other against the back tire of the buggy and knocking the mud off her tan, then glanced at the porch where her mother sat, rocking slowly in a large wooden rocking chair, her gaze on the little girl. The old lady fluttered her hand in Martha's direction. Martha gave her a slight nod and a tight smile, then veered left to go into the barn. Walking through the large open doors, she turned and hung the shovel on the wall. She pulled the stone from her pocket and tossed it into the small wooden crate on the shelf. It rattled against the other stones until gravity pulled it into its resting place. 23, she mumbled. On the side, she pulled off her white leather work gloves, tossing them onto the shelf by the crate, and wiping the sweat of her hands on her faded jeans. She checked on the animals, locking up the barn for the night. She yawned, heading across the yard to the house and walking up the 3 steps to the porch. Her body ached and her boots scraped against the wood planks as she moved to where her mother sat, still rocking slowly, still watching Susie. Standing behind her mother, Martha leaned down and kissed the top of her head, resting her hands on the old lady's shoulders. "Everything okay?" Martha asked quietly, her eyes on Susie. "She's fine." Her mother patted and Root Beer rolled around in the grass. Susie threw a ball, and Root Beer brought it back, but didn't let it go. Susie chased him around the yard, laughing and squealing at him. "I miss my soaps." Martha looked down at her mother. "I know, Ma, but we can't bring the repairman out here to fix the antenna. You know that. We just have to enjoy the movies we got them 100 times." Martha sighed. "Well, the other night was the same thing." She turned back to Susie. Martha smiled as she watched the little girl, having fun, no worries. The corner of her mouth tugged down. The porch light turned on with the darkening sky. The chirp of nearby crickets blended with the occasional clucking chicken, neighing horse, and snorting pig. A loud buzzer sounded from inside. "Susie, time to wash up for dinner," Martha called. The little girl jumped up from the grass, calling the dog to follow her, then ran inside. Martha's mother stood slowly from her chair, taking care. Martha took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill her chest before turning to head inside and pull the roast out of the oven. "I miss Daddy." Susie's groggy voice was quiet as the little girl drifted off to sleep. "Me too, baby girl." Martha leaned down and kissed Susie lightly on the cheek. "Me too, baby girl." Martha leaned down and kissed Susie lightly on the cheek. "Me too." She sat back on the bed, her hands still on Susie's back. Her gaze drifted out the window as a memory of the last day with Michael, just over a year ago, came to mind. "What are you watching, babe?" Martha asked, walking to the living room. "What are you watching, babe?" Martha asked, walking to the living room after dropping Susie off at school. Michael looked at her, concern on his face. He nodded to the television. The news. Martha stepped over to the love seat, where a white laundry basket full of clothes, fresh from the dryer, waited for her. She and faced the TV. That's what they say every year. Michael tugged at one of her belt loops and pulled her down to sit next to him on the couch. Mar, sit and watch this with me. It's kind of scary. Martha scooched close to Michael, leaning into him as she focused on the newscaster's words. Common flu-like symptoms including fever, coughing, sneezing, lethargy, and body aches, skin rashes, complications including respiratory distress and pneumonia. It's highly contagious and particularly dangerous to the elderly. The Omet virus is indiscriminately deadly, killing 60% of those that catch it, and has led to the deaths totaling over 3,000 nationwide. Martha smiled. If this is such a big deal, why are we just hearing about it now? Michael laughed, pulling her close and kissing her temple. Because we don't watch the news, and we live miles away from the rest of the world. Eyes closed as Michael's hand massaged her shoulder. Maybe I should cancel my trip to the city tomorrow. That's why I don't risk bringing this thing home. Martha turned to look at him with a smirk. It's just the flu. You'll be fine. Michael smiled broadly. I don't care about catching the flu, Mar. I just don't want to bring anything back to you or your mom. Mom. Martha turned to face him, wrapping her arms around his neck and smiled. Oh, so chivalrous. She leaned in and gave him a peck on the lips, and grinned. Well, if you're planning on getting sick and dying on me, I better make a use of you while I can. She took his hand and pulled him off the couch, leading him up the stairs. Martha blinked back the tears threatening to form in her eyes. She took a deep breath. Michael had never come home from his appointment in the city. A car accident amidst the chaos, fear, and panic had taken him from her. She leaned down and kissed Susie's cheek again. She smiled as she brushed strands of hair off Susie's forehead. Martha pulled the sheet nightstand, flicking on the nightlight. She reached down to the floor and scratched Root Beer's head as he slept. She stood, her steps echoing loudly in the silence as she shifted over to the window, making sure the latch was in place. Looking out of the dark sky, the moon shone bright, lighting up the front yard. Her eyes narrowed at movement down the dirt driveway. A figure was making its way up toward the house. Martha turned around and ran down out of Susie's room, sprinting down the stairs. She grabbed the shotgun off the dining table, flinging open the front door as she ran out onto the porch. The screen door slammed closed behind her. This is private. The screen door slammed closed behind her. This is private property. Martha held the shotgun level with the man's chest. Root Beer was suddenly barking from the upstairs. Whoa, hey, sorry. The boy, who couldn't be more than 17, held both his hands up and took a step back down the dirt path. Down from the porch, walking toward the boy. Why are you here? The boy continued to step back as Martha stepped forward, his hands still in the air. I'm sorry, ma'am. My car broke down a few miles away, and I got turned around. I saw your house and figured you could steal our resources. The boy's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't know what you're talking about. I got lost. I just need a phone, that's it. Martha's lips curled. Liar! She cocked the shotgun. I can't have you bringing this disease to my property, infecting my family. The boy nearly stumbled as he fell back. Lady, calm down. What disease? Stumbled as he fell back. Lady, calm down. What disease? Your eyes are bloodshot. I saw you coughing and sneezing as you came down the drive. The boy shook his head. No, I'm not sick. I have allergies. You've got a Met. His eyebrows drew down. A Met. Wait, no. He shook his head. The outbreak? Brows drew down. A Met. Wait, no. He shook his head. The outbreak? A year ago? Yes. Martha swallowed, her hands starting to sweat. This was just a boy. He started lowering his hands and took a half step forward. Ma'am, that outbreak was contained. Martha held the shotgun steady as she continued. Stop lying. The boy took a breath. Okay, ma'am, that outbreak killed some people, yeah. But it was greatly exaggerated. It's been gone for almost a year now. Martha shook her head. Liars. You're all a bunch of liars. The boy glanced around. Okay. How about I just go? I'll just leave. The boy glanced around. Okay. How about I just go? I'll just leave. Martha sucked her teeth. See, that's a problem too. You've seen our property. She motioned her head to the side. "You know what we have here. If I let you go, you could bring others." The boy shook his head frantically. "No, and let out a small cough. Blood seeped from between his lips. He fell to the ground. Martha's mother stood behind the crumpled body. A large kitchen knife dripping blood was clutched in her right hand. Her gaze raised from the man to meet Martha's. "Why do you always let them just shotgun inside?" 24. Martha moved toward her mother and the boy's body. She looked down as she shifted her head back and forth. "No rash." She looked at her mom. Her mother shrugged. Martha looked back to the house. The soft glow of Susie's nightlight shone dimly through her second-story window. Martha's lips pulled into a tight line as she turned to face the distant field of wildflowers. "I'll go get the shovel." I have to apologize for reading in that accent. I blame Rosa for writing it in that accent.
I'll be reading Devon's story, Membership Revoked. There is a case that I can't let go, the one that I couldn't solve, the murderer that murdered me. I'm telling you this so that you don't feel cheated. If you don't like stories where the main character doesn't make it out, go to your local library and check out Harry Potter or something. Except that he does die in that novel, then comes back. I'm not that lucky. No magical save for me. Now that we have that nasty bit of information out of the way, let me walk you through it. I was staring at 8 pictures of 8 different victims. Mind if I ask you some questions about the case? I turned and almost spat at the man to get out. He wore a faded black suit and a blue tie. His shoes were black loafers. Detective Torres will be happy to tell you what to do with your questions. He laughed. Come on, detective. Questions can't. The victims had all been killed within the last 17 weeks. 1 death every 2 weeks. If the pattern held, someone was going to die late tonight or early tomorrow morning. I couldn't figure out a way to stop it. FBI's politicking. If you let us help you with the case, maybe we can catch this. It was a question phrased like a demand. His tone was demanding too. I flicked my eyes in his direction, then back to the board. The victims were as different from each other as a cannon blast was to a bang-snap firework. Nothing connected them together, except the way they died. Wallets open, nothing missing, except the way they died. Wallets open, nothing missing. A handwritten note that read, "Your membership has been revoked." A poison that I can't pronounce in their bloodstreams. Nasty stuff that. It paralyzed the victims, locking them up until their lungs stopped inhaling. Death by asphyxiation. I kept wondering if the killer was in the room with them, if the last person they saw was their murderer, if he spoke to them, if the last thing they heard was his cold, hard voice, if he had explained why he had chosen them. If you want to talk to someone about that, Detective Torres. He moved in front of me, cutting off my view of the board. He held out a card. "I think you're too smart to be only a cop. If you want something bigger, give me a call and I'll see what I can do." I took the card without looking away from his face. "Thanks. Now could you get out of my way? I'm trying to save lives." His grin was stupid. "I already tossed you out of here once." Detective Torres' voice was pitched low. It sounded more like a threat. The FBI agent smiled at my partner. "I was just having some words with your partner." Torres grunted. "You've had your words. Get out before I toss you out." I didn't do the card on the table behind me. Later, I would stick it with the other cards that I was collecting. The note was the interesting bit to me. The handwriting on the note, anyway. Calligraphy. Or the most elaborate cursive that I've ever seen. All curves and loops. It was the kind of writing you expect to see on a wedding invitation. Not left on dead bodies. Writing you expect to see on a wedding invitation. Not left on dead bodies. I wondered what group they had all been in that had gotten them killed. Hey, maybe it was Fight Club and they violated the rules. Detective Torres said something to the FBI agent that I didn't catch. They left together. I leaned on the conference room table. They left together. I leaned on the conference room table, chewed on my nails, and tried to force my brain to see something that I hadn't seen before. something that would connect the murder victims together. They varied in ages from Mrs. Sarah Hughes, a retired nurse in her 70s, to 16-year-old Callum Garcia, a high school student, seemed to be the deciding factor either. We had even gone so far as to have the researchers down on 4 dig into Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram profiles to see if they connect that way, to find us some mutual friends or something. No luck. We were looking for the world's most careful serial killer. Whatever his preference for his victims was, I couldn't figure it out. We had nothing. We had interviewed every family member at least 3 times, friends and co-workers. I reached my hand back for my coffee. "Detective," Captain Jenkins shouted from the door. His voice was soft as a screeching crow. I jerked and knocked over my cup. Delicious, warm, black bean juice spilled over the table, soaked up my loose paperwork, case files, requisition forms, and a book I had checked out from the library about poisons. He doesn't have money to spend on books, or so I was told when I asked. I cursed and snatched the closest computer and my now wet cell phone. Computer safe and phone rescued, I looked up at Captain Joseph Jenkins. His friends called him Joe. I called him Sir. He was a balding man that tried to hide it with a comb over, wearing the same suit that he had been wearing 2 days ago. When this case had started, he looked 10 years younger than he did now. Long hours behind a desk, lack of sleep and exercise. Pour on the stress and add in the unhealthy amounts of takeout we had been pounding down over the past weeks. A person tends to gain weight under those circumstances. "Sir?" "Tell me you have something new." His tone was still sharp. I had to resist the urge to make a wisecrack, telling him that nothing had changed since the last time he had checked, 10 minutes ago. I decided that a joke right now wouldn't endear me to his heart. I shook my head. "No, sir." His frown lines deepened. "Where's Torres?" "Deeper. I expect updates." He wasn't upset with me. Deep down, I knew that. He was getting phone calls from everyone that had a phone. The press, the brass above him, who were getting calls from the governor, the FBI hovering around the office like the fly that won't leave you alone when you're trying to eat outside. All that space in other police departments, everyone demanding the case be turned over to them. But the first murder had happened in our district, so it was our case. The case getting taken away from us wouldn't look good for his promotion potential. It was probably threatening his career. However, in our defense, how are we supposed to track a killer no one has ever seen? How am I supposed to link all these people together and come up with the right answers? I had to hold back a sigh by clenching my jaw together. I gave him a tight nod and was careful to control my tone. "You'll know as soon as I do." He nodded and left. His shoulders hunched, his pace quick. Anna, the civilian secretary, came in carrying a roll of paper towels, her eyes soft, her face understanding. "Let me help." I nodded, and together we cleaned up the spilled coffee. She promised to return with new copies of the paperwork that had been written. Detective Torres was the lead detective on the case. He preferred cool-colored shirts. I think he liked the way they made his jaw line and his eyes stand out. He shook his head at the table. "Any miracles happen while I was gone?" I sighed, turned back to the victim board, and leaned against the table again. He came up to the table next to me and he crossed his arms over his chest. Together, we stared at the same information we had been staring at for 17 weeks. We missed something. I crossed my arms, copying him. "We must have missed something." He grunted. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Anna came in with fresh paperwork and more coffee, then left. She didn't say anything. I think, out of boredom or desperation, he made a call. "I want to talk to Mrs. Hill again." I frowned at that. We had questioned her 3 times already. What for? He grabbed his coat from off the chair. "To do something other than stare at this board." I shook my head. "I don't think it will do any good." His smile was warm. It didn't touch his eyes. "That's why I'm lead detective." 2 hours later, after we had grabbed a bite to eat at the gut truck, picked up another cup of coffee, and topped off our cruiser with gas, we pulled up outside Mrs. Hill's house. It was a small house, maintained with the love and affection that only a happily married couple can give. The kind of attention that turns a house into a home. The kind that makes you feel different when you walk in. Like everything that happened outside the walls didn't matter. All that mattered was that you were safe and happened outside the walls didn't matter. All that mattered was that you were safe and together. My partner rang the doorbell. Mrs. Hill opened the door enough to look out. In the brief moment the door was open, I could see that her eyes were red, her face splotchy with all the crying that she had been doing. Mrs. Hill, we have a few more questions we would like to ask you. Come in. Her voice was raspy and soft. She was wearing gray sweats, a long-sleeved gray sweater that was 3 sizes too big for her, and her hair was in a bun over her head. If I had to guess, I would have said that the sweater was her husband's. She led us to their den. It was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tightly closed. On the coffee table, tablets, 1 bite taken out of each one, 3 empty glasses, a bowl of milk, and a cup of coffee the color of milk chocolate. She cleared the coffee table off with an apology about the mess, mumbling something under her breath about polite visitors calling first. Coffee? She called out from the kitchen. Calling first. Coffee? She called out from the kitchen. Thank you, but no, ma'am, Torres answered, his tone professional. The pictures on the walls were of the happy family, a mother, a father, and 2 little girls. The position of the photos served as a timeline. I traced it with my eyes. From marriage to the birth of the twin girls, the first day home, the first winter, the first steps, the first spring, the first baby tooth to come out, the first day of school. I was glad when Mrs. Hill came in so I wouldn't have to look anymore. The cup in her hands was steaming. I regretted leaving mine in the car, but it would have been crass to bring followed suit. I counted 8 cubes of sugar that she added to her coffee. She stirred, took a sip, and set the cup down. Did you find the man that did this to my family? Her voice shook. The man that took my husband and my children's father? My throat tightened, and I glanced at Torres. No, ma'am, we haven't caught him yet. Her glare took us both in. I don't see why you were here, in my house, on my couch, when the man who killed my husband is still... She turned her face. Out there. She wiped her hand across her face. Free. I winced and rubbed the back of my neck as a tingling swept up the back of my neck and across my face. The tingling turned to a burning that made my neck, face, and ears feel hot. I wanted to get up and leave, to let the woman mourn in peace. Instead, I counted with a deliberate slowness, to 10 in my head, filling my lungs to control my reactions. We would like you to walk us through what you remember from the day you found your husband. Voice neutral and detached. He was good at this, talking to victims without getting emotionally involved. I couldn't do that. I felt for her loss, her pain. She turned to look at us with tears still on her face and in her eyes. I wasn't the one that found him. Her voice was cold. Colder than the one that found him. Her voice was cold. Colder than trying to run naked through a blizzard at night. The girls did. After we got back from our church camping trip, she motioned to the house. I sent them to be with their grandparents for a while. She stood up, her back straight. Get out of my house and don't come back until... I swallowed and stood. My legs felt weak and my skin felt like there were bugs crawling up my arms. I wanted to offer my condolences, to swear to her that we would find this bastard. Mrs. Hill, we understand. She brought her hand up, then back down in a cutting motion. No, she looked me right in the eyes. How could you understand anything that I'm going through? How could you understand what it's like to lose your best friend and not even be allowed to bury him? My partner stood and tapped my arm. Thank you for your time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card, offering it to her. If you remember anything out of the ordinary, or if you need anything, please. If you remember anything out of the ordinary, or if you need anything, please call. She stared at his hand, swallowed. I found an AA chip. The room got quiet. I was sure Torres could hear my heartbeat quickening. 2 of the other victims attended AA meetings. Torres pulled his little notebook. 2 of the other victims attended AA meetings. Torres pulled his little notebook. Do you know where he went to his meetings? She shook her head. I didn't even know that he had a problem. I thought that he was bowling with his friends on Thursday nights. She turned her back to us. But when I called around, none of them knew anything about Thursday night bowling. I snapped it shut. Thank you for the information. You should leave. Torres put his card on the table. On the drive back, I sipped my coffee. It was 2 in the afternoon. Torres was on the phone with Anna. He was telling her to look up all the AA meetings in the area that met on Thursdays. Every single one in the city. He hung up on the phone but kept it in his hand. I'm not sure if I can do this job. The words coming out of my mouth caught me by surprise, but they were true. For an awkward 3 minutes, Torres didn't say anything. He was careful not to respond. When you came on, I told you to make and maintain a binder. Did you do it? I kept my eyes on the road, watched the traffic, the people walking by, children on the sidewalks. Yeah? I want you to go and read through it. He paused for an appropriately dramatic moment. Then we can have this conversation again. We didn't speak the rest. I pulled a black 1-inch binder and set it on my desk. Around me, the station buzzed with chatter. The zick-zick of the printer, phones ringing. The vent right above my desk blew freezing air that had been chilled in the Arctic, then piped into the office. I opened the black 3-inch folder and read the first article. It was about the successful arrest of a suspected child murderer. I had been on that case. They let me make the arrest. It went on to talk about how grateful the family was, how safe the community felt knowing that he was behind bars. The next article told of a 16-year-old Martin Hayes. It touched gently on the gruesome details of his rape and murder. I had helped with that case. I turned the page and read the next article. It laid out the details of the Michelle Adams home invasion and the evidential apprehension of her murderer. It had helped with that case, too. With each page I turned and I felt my muscles tightening with a desire for something. I got a fluttery feeling in my chest, like squirrels fighting over the last nut of the season. Snapping the binder closed, I internally thanked Torres for his binder requirement. I pushed my chair away from my desk and headed into the conference room. They had pulled the corkboard from the small office and brought it in here. Pinned up was a map of the city. Locations marked with red pins. I guessed that those were the AA meetings happening tonight. The room was full of uniformed officers, detectives. The boss was there. He was in the middle of a speech. He cut off when I walked in. Glad you could make it, detective. Next time, be on time. I nodded. He pointed the timeline that we had pinned up on the wall. We expect the killer to strike either tonight or tomorrow. He looked over at Torres. Torres will hand out assignments. Torres read off a clipboard, assigning officers and detectives to the locations that Anna had marked. His quick and efficient manner was infectious. Officers moved with bounce in their steps. Soon enough, we were the only 2 left in the room. What about us? He nodded to the door and I closed it. You decide what you want? I nodded. I'm a cop. I'll always be a cop. I want to catch this guy. He grinned. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. Good. He closed the distance and put his hand on my shoulder. We are going to St. Wood's Church of the Cross. He closed the distance and put his hand on my shoulder. We are going to St. Wood's Church of the Cross. It's the closest meeting location to Mr. Hill's home. On the way out, Anna caught my arm. I motioned for Torres to keep going. Her smile was flirtatious. I hope you don't mind. I returned that library book for you. I smiled. Thank you. Anna, that was very thoughtful for you. I smiled. Thank you. Anna, that was very thoughtful. I bit my lip and rubbed the back of my neck. I'd been meaning to ask her out for months, but had talked myself out of it every time. I'm a coward when it comes to dating, so sue me. Maybe after this investigation, I turned and coughed into my shirt. Maybe we could go get a drink or old stone and bricks. It was like a small cathedral hidden in the depths of a city. Every cliche Catholic church I had ever seen in the movies. The inside was, let's just say, not as nice as you would have thought. The carpet was worn so far down that I could almost see the concrete underneath. It smelled like stale burned coffee, depression, and unforgivable sins. The paint on the walls was yellow and peeling off in thin ribbons. There were no benches, no rows of padded chairs. What they did have was stacked chairs lining the walls, uncomfortable-looking chairs at that. In the middle of the room, there were chairs lining the walls, uncomfortable-looking chairs at that. In the middle of the room, there were about 20 chairs in rows. About 10 of them had people in them. Every single person turned to look at us as we walked in. A priest was at the pulpit. He smiled. Please come in, and motioned us to sit. Torres and I did so. The meeting passed too quickly. Anything suspicious. Secretly, I hoped that someone would get up and try to run for the door. That would have made our job easy. On a whim, I got up and introduced myself, talked about my battle with alcohol and how hard it was not to slip up. After the meeting, the members of AA stood around the square table they used for coffee and donuts and chatted. I joined them and started making small talk. I was approached by no less than 5 men offering to be my mentor. My response was always the same. I would have to think about it and get back to them. I lost track of Torres during this time. The AA members left and Torres and I approached He smiled. I could see sweat on the side of his face. I don't think I've ever seen either of you before. My name is Father Obret. Torres smiled and shook his hand. I'm Detective Torres, and this is my partner. We would like to ask you some questions. Father Obret was able to identify 3 of the victims. He also told us that none of them had thanked him for his time, gave him a card, and asked him to call if he remembered anything strange. When we were back in the car and driving down the road, Torres spoke his mind. It has to be someone in that room. I nodded. Yeah, but who? Back in the conference room with reports from all the other officers spread out in front of us, we started sorting the useful from the less than useful. I woke up with Torres shaking my shoulder. I want you to go home and get a good night's sleep. What? I was just resting my eyes. You haven't had a real night's sleep in over 4 days. His eyes and face were empathetic. Go home. Get some sleep. For both of us. Be here by 9 at the latest. I felt my jaw tighten. For both of us. Be here by 9 at the latest. I felt my jaw tighten. You haven't had a real night's sleep in 6 days. He glared. Just go get some. He cut off his sharp and biting tone. You can leave on your own, or I can have some uniforms take you home. I pulled up to my house an hour later. Torres was right. Torres was right. I almost had to pull over to catch some sleep. My eyelids were so heavy that I could hear them with every blink. I almost broke the key off in my door when the top lock wouldn't release the key. I had to wiggle it free. I kept meaning to replace that thing with a new one. But who has the time for that? I came in the house, locked the door. I glanced at my bedroom, decided against it, and went for the bottle of deep red wine. The wine was something I would never tell anyone at the department. I would never hear the end of it. I sat down on the couch and turned on the TV, taking slow and shallow sips. It dried my mouth and burned my throat as it went down. It was amazing. My left hand holding it in place. A game show came on that was a cross between Hangman and Guess the Price. I didn't pay attention to it. My mind was on the case and on Anna, on where I wanted to be. I didn't notice that my lips had gone numb as I drank more. I didn't realize that I was slowly losing the feeling in my arms and legs. Not until the glass slipped from my fingers and splashed on the couch. I cringed at that. It would stain. When I tried to reach for the cup to pick it up, that's when I realized that something was terribly wrong. I knew what was coming. Still, I had to fight, had to try. If I could get to my phone, 1 foot away faster as adrenaline pumped through my blood. Still, my arms wouldn't respond. My legs wouldn't even wiggle. It may as well have been someone else's arms. I could hear someone at the back door. My chest began to feel heavy as the poison reached my lungs. Soon I would stop breathing. The back door opened. The back door closed and locked. Breathing. The back door opened. The back door closed and locked. I fought harder. I just had to move, to get up, do something, wiggle my fingers. I could hear sure footsteps coming down the hall. Whoever it was knew the layout of my house. She stepped into my vision. Her hair was done in a bun. She was wearing those grandma glasses. Her hair was done in a bun. She was wearing those grandma glasses, the ones that have the string around them so they stay on your neck. She had on this shawl thing. It was both stylish and boring. Plain brown skirt and shoes. On one shoulder, she had a large, ugly brown purse. She was wearing latex gloves. I tried to speak, but she opened it and held it out so I could see. It was still wet with the coffee I had spilled. This isn't the first time that you've returned a book in poor condition. She grabbed my wallet off the table and opened it, pulled out the contents. She went through my cards and drew one out, then put everything back. It was getting harder to breathe. I could feel my body struggling for each breath. She held up the card she had taken. My library card. My eyes were watering from the amount of time that they had been open. I couldn't remember the last time I had blinked. She put my wallet on my lap, reached into her purse and withdrew a note. I knew what it would say. My lap, reached into her purse and withdrew a note. I knew what it would say. Your membership has been revoked. Torres would think it was someone at the AA meeting. All signs would point to that. I would never get that drink with Anna. The world started to go black. I tried to push myself away from the couch. I felt myself breathe out, and I didn't inhale. That's it. That's the last thing I remember. I did warn you that it wasn't going to end well. Well, that wraps up our first episode. Thank you for listening. That was Wildflowers by me, Rosa, and
Membership revoked by me. Thank you. Subscribe. Get your friends and family to subscribe. Tell strangers to subscribe. Tune in next week. And writers, send us your work. Thanks for tuning in.